Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Candidate Conversations. I am so looking forward to today's conversation with an educator from Utah who's currently a candidate, Mr. Scott Judy. Go ahead and either turn it up, put in your headphones, but get ready to hear this incredible story around advocacy, representation, and so much more. Enjoy! Well, Scott, thank you so much for being on our candidate podcast today. I'm so excited to get to know more about you, your journey, what brought you to board certification. So let's just get started with introductions. Tell us who you are, where you're coming from, whatever you feel is pertinent to the conversation.
All right. Well, thank you, Danielle, and thank you to the National Board podcast for having me on. So my name is Scott Judy. I am a social studies teacher in Utah. I teach at Viewmont High School in Bountiful. It's just a little bit north of Salt Lake. And this is my 18th year. I also teach adjunct at Weber State University and have also spent most of my time as a teacher, also as a coach. Although about 2 years ago, when my wife told me, "Hey, we're pregnant with number four," I said, "I think I'm done." But I was really blessed to be in coach in a great community here, and I love this school and I love what I do.
That's so exciting. So what sport did you coach again?
So I coached multiple sports. I started out with track, and then I coached our girls tennis team for 15 years, and
Wow.
that was so much fun. Love the girls. I also got to coach girls golf and baseball.
That is amazing. So obviously, just by your brief introduction and your resume of sorts, we know that you are someone who engages in the profession at all levels, right? From coach to working in higher ed to your classroom job. And I'm so curious, of all those things, how has that supported you in bringing you to the national board process? What considerations did you have to make? Did you have reservations? Because sometimes we'll see it, right, where people are like, "I've heard about this process, but I don't know." So I'm so curious, what was your process and journey to national board?
Right. So I'm part of the Utah Teacher Fellows. A I was a member for from 2019 to 2021, and then I got the opportunity to stick on as part of the leadership team in a role that I still currently serve in as the professional learning facilitator. And there I got to meet some people who were really, really heavily involved in national boards. John Arthur, who works with the national board team on the national level, and then in my cohort with the Utah Teacher Fellows, I had Tony Zaney and Kerry Johnson, who have been advocating for some more support with national board certification here in Utah, and even created the Utah National Board Certification Cohort. And I was at a conference last year. I got to be one of the keynote speakers and a presenter. And I ran into Tony and Kerry, and they had this table, and it was all about national board. And so I stopped and had about a 10-15 minute conversation with both of them, and some of it was catching up, but part of it was also, hey, I've heard about this and I've wanted to know, I've been interested, let's get me there, tell me, sell me on the process. And both Tony and Carrie looked me dead in the eye and said, it's the single best thing you can ever do as a teacher. And that really resonated with me because I trust Tony and Carrie, but thinking about my experiences that I had as a coach. And there were a lot of positive things that I was able to transfer from coaching into my classroom.
Mm.
But hearing it from them, from two people that I know and I respect and I look up to as educators, and they said, this is better than any single thing you can do. I go, all right, well, you got to tell me why. If you're going to make a statement like that, you got to tell me why. And it goes back to the first national board standard. They said, this program will help you know your students better than anything else out there. And I got to be honest, I think that's true. As I go through this certification process and I'm looking at the standards and I'm trying to figure out the different components, and it can feel very overwhelming at times, because I had a friend describe national boards to me as getting a master's degree, kind of work. And I think I had a little bit of PTSD from my own master's that I got. Because a lot of my masters, well, it's in history, and so a lot of my master's work was like, hey, read this 700 to 900 page book in a week and write the paper. And I don't know if I want that again, but going through this and and looking at different examples, putting into work. And it all goes back to that first standard of how well do you know your students? And I thought I knew my students in the
Mm.
community really well, but really getting into something more on a deeper level. What is it that I can do in my community with my students that's going to help them progress? Because every school and every school community is so unique. And it's been able to help me better identify where are my students at and where do I want them to go? And what role do I play in getting my students there? And so I normally keep about 70 to 80% of my content, and I'm constantly trying to tinker and rearrange. But this year it's been cool because doing this process, I've actually started to focus more on the reflection piece.
Mm.
And that is something that I've got from looking at the national board stuff and working with Tony and Carrie and that group is, hey, how can I get you to reflect on this practice? Because the national board certification makes me reflect on my own so much. And what I'm starting to notice is in my social studies classes, it's not just, hey, do like this reading guide, answer these questions. It's answer these questions and then tell me why this was important. Like, what is this one component? So in my government class right now, we're talking about how public opinion can affect politicians, the government, everything. And I talk about an idea called political efficacy.
Mm.
This idea that if we engage, we can make a difference. And I'm challenging my students, like, do you think that's true? But also, what are other ways that we can engage besides voting? Because that's the whole point, right? We want to create engaged citizens. And I think a lot of students walk out and say, hey, if I'll go ahead and vote, like you've sold me on that. But what about the other parts? How can I get you to engage on the other parts? And I think, that's also kind of where I'm at is I'm learning how to engage in my practice. I'm in year 18. How can I engage with my students in other ways?
I so deeply appreciate how, in your response, you really brought it back to the students every single time, right? Like your motivation after being told, like, it's the single best thing you can do for your practice. You're like, but tell me more, right? And send it back to the students as you're thinking or discussing about even how you tinker and refine and reflect on your content in order to better support students. I think sometimes people might miss that that is what this process is about, right? You're refining your practice, you're becoming more reflective, all at the end of the day in service of students. And so you shared a bit about how candidacy, just being in the process that you're in currently, has supported you as a professional. I'm so curious too. I heard that piece around advocacy that you spoke about a little bit. I wonder how candidacy fits into this role of advocacy, whether it's like for students, for the profession, within your community. Um, if you can speak a bit about that, like candidacy and advocacy, how do those two show up for you?
Yeah. So when you look at the standards, right? The second standard, developing social understanding, engagement, and civic identity. I think that teachers naturally we think about, hey, how can I get my students to do this? And I think we forget a lot of times, I need to do this as well.
Hmm.
I need to engage. I need to. And as a quick story about that, when COVID happened, I know that there were debates around everywhere, right? Do we have students stay at home? Do we bring everybody back? Like here in my district, we did a hybrid model for a
Hmm.
little bit. And at the center of that was nobody ever asked the students. Nobody ever asked them, hey, what would you be comfortable with? We always just kind of assumed, it's going to be the parents. They're going to know and make their feelings known on behalf of the students. But I remember having multiple conversations with the superintendent at that point, and I said, "Look, when I've asked students, when it's come up, and they've asked me, hey, Mr. Judy, what can we expect when is there going to be a school year next year? What's it going to look like?" And I just asked them, hey, what would you prefer? I have a voice. I know who to talk to. What would you prefer? And so I gathered the info on my students' wishes, and then I directly sent those to the superintendent. And I directly sent those to school board members and others saying, hey, this is coming right from the students. You need to listen to them. And even though, things didn't go exactly the way that the students wanted, or I wanted, whatever, right? The fact that my students saw me advocating on their behalf and they know that I was passing those things along, I do think meant a lot to them. And, current, like, schools are supposed to be a reflection of the community, right? They're supposed to be a synergy between the schools and the community. And we can say, hey, I have my community council, sure, that works. But I think that there's other ways for teachers and students to get together and create some synergy there so that we can reflect what's going on in those communities and we can form that partnership instead of it being an uneven balance in one way or another. And I think that that's part of this program too, is also trying to get teachers not just to look in their classroom but also beyond. Now I get to cheat on that a little bit, right, being part of the Utah Teacher Fellows and advocating. Like, I was up at the legislature just a couple of weeks ago, sitting on the floor with my representative and talking to other legislators and policymakers. Like, I get to cheat a little bit at that just by nature of some of the stuff that I do. But it is cool that, like, when I can come back and I can show a picture to my students and I
Mm,
can say, hey, I wrote this email, and if you want to see the email, like, there's parts I'm probably going to have to redact,
yeah.
just because, like, I can't show like my personal politics, but I can show you, like, I have the receipts.
I think that's so awesome because I think you're, as a former elementary teacher, I think you're in such a position working with older students, to deeply model like what does that look like, right? Like what does that engagement look like, even from the systemics, lens of like within school, like what is it that you want and or need, and how do you voice that, and how do you collaborate to share that message outside of just this classroom or this school up to the superintendent. So I think that is so phenomenal, and it is rooted in, as you stated, the standards for your cert area. And so I want to back up just a bit because you shared your cert area, but I'm so curious as far as your planning for submission and kind of where you are in the process. How many components are you doing? What does submission look like for you? Coming up in May, which feels so long, but like February's like practically over at this point.
Yeah.
So yeah, like what was your planning process? How did you decide, and what components are you doing?
Okay, so I had no idea, and I just assumed, hey, let's go in order 1, 2, 3, 4, because that's normal, right?
Sounds right. Yep, you're not the only one.
And
Do it all the time.
I started studying with an outside service for component one, and it had been so long I looked at anything ed psych related. And, I've been teaching US history for so many years that I've forgotten a lot of the world civ content that I used to teach. And
Mm,
so I was trying to do some practice tests and whatnot, and I was getting my butt kicked. And I was like, I don't know if I want to do this, you know? But in one of the meetings with the Utah National Board cohort, the suggestion was made, hey, look at trying to do components 2 and 3
mm,
first, and then maybe 4, and then 1 is kind of the very last one. Like, you don't have to do it in order. And as I was looking at them, I go, oh man, that makes me so happy because it helps because I can kind of play to my strengths now,
mm.
and then hopefully get, maybe 2 and 3 submitted this year. And then that way I have a little bit clearer roadmap of what I need to do to prep to get the other components in later. But like you said, like, February is almost out, and I don't know where everybody else is, but I've got a really busy month coming up, and it has nothing to do with spring break. It has to do with some other events here in Utah that I get to be a part of, and it's awesome. But it's like, now I got to prep for a sub, and then now I got to prep for my presentation at that event, and then I got to do more, and I got to play catch up. And it's like, okay, well, I also need to make sure I schedule time to get this done because this is important.
Yeah. So I want to follow up with that question because that is a conversation I have often with candidates, recently certified, board certified teachers. Like, what does the alignment look like for you, or how do you plan for, what, I know March is going to be so busy. So instead of like setting myself up for failure, like how do you plan around life? Because I'm a big believer in life personal life, work alignment, not so much balance because that's a little bit harder to attain, but alignment, right? Like if I know March is stock full for me, how are you making sure that you still attend to what's important to you without losing the other things that are important to you as well?
Well, when I figure it out, I'll let you know. But
I was
I,
hoping you
I
had the magic answer, Scott.
yeah, no, I think a lot of it is, just trying to make sure that I stay in alignment with myself and the things that I like to do. Like I have four beautiful little girls at home and an amazing wife, and I want to give my time to them. But there is that dad guilt that kind of comes in sometimes where it's like, hey, I mean, if the words come out of my mouth, hey, I can't play with you right now because I need to go write my national board conclusion. Like my oldest just turned 7. She's not going to understand that. She's just going to know, oh,
All
well,
she heard was, I can't
there.
play.
Yeah. And so I think a lot of it is just trying to make sure that like I schedule time with my wife with like, hey, maybe Saturday mornings instead of me sleeping in a little bit or something, what, I'm going to get up around my normal school time and I'm going to work on this because that's going to be the best time. And then if I can work on this a little bit, I can give you and the girls more time later. And that's going to
Mhm.
be ultimately the hope on how to maintain balance of the things that I need to do for me just to keep myself healthy, but then also make sure that I'm spending time with my family, make sure that I'm taking care of the stuff in my classroom that I need to and other parts. And I mean, it's probably going to involve a lot of caffeine, but that's okay. It's a
Okay.
wonderful, wonderful little substance.
So, for everyone who's listening, I just want to make sure that you hear in this conversation that, like, one, the time that you put into this process is your own, and two, in a way that's not bound, like, a higher ed course or even undergrad. Like, no one's going to tell you, Danielle, you need to sit down on a Saturday afternoon and write for 3 hours. And in the same breath, you as candidate have to like navigate that for yourself and be honest. So, like, sometimes we'll have candidates who say, "Yeah, I'm just going to buckle down and write all spring break," and then like trips come up, and then people want to hang out because they know you're off. Like that's allowable. Just
Yeah.
plan for your life as you do the process because
That reminds me, I was sitting in a workshop with the DBQ people, and they brought out an extra guest speaker. She said, after lunch, I'm going to teach you the secret of how to grade this stuff, how to grade it quick. And the whole lunch, and I was a young teacher at the time. It was like my third or fourth year. And I was so excited. I was like, please tell me the secret to grading. And then when lunch gets up and she goes, okay, here's the secret, put on a good pot of coffee. And I'm like, are you kidding me?
you're like,
It's
that
like,
was
that's
the
your
groundbreaking
secret.
news. What?
And she said, listen, and I mean, for me as a young teacher, I was still pretty impressionable at that point.
Yeah.
And she just said, look, you sometimes it's just a mental hurdle that you've
Mm,
got to get through with grading because grading can take up so much. But I think as teachers, we're very routine and schedule oriented just by nature. And I see stuff online, teachers joking about once the school year starts, you're going to prep for the school year. They start to kind of like align their bathroom time again, or something. And it's kind of like I don't know if other people realize just how like maniacal we can be about our own profession sometimes. But sometimes it's like, hey, if that means that I got to put on my calendar because I'm a calendar, I'm a task oriented person. If that means, hey, for the next few weeks, I'm going to sacrifice my Saturday mornings. I'm going to be up by 6 and I'm going to write till about 8, maybe 8:30 when my girls get up and at the point where they're starting to be like, hey, I'm getting hungry. If I can schedule that 2 to 2 hours for myself, that's got to be something that I'm going to do for a little bit.
Yeah, I love that because again, those 2 hours start to add up, right? And I think the more that you engage in something as strategic as that, like what you get out of those 2 hours becomes more and more than like maybe that first pass when you're like, oh, I really could be sleeping in. I really could be catching up on like the latest show I've been watching. So no, I so agree with that. And so Scott, as we close our conversation today, I'm curious, like if you were to give past Scott some advice and or a current candidate, we're in February, We've come back from breaks, or for many people, they're heading back into another break for spring break. What's a point of advice that you would have wanted to hear at this time frame in your career, or even for someone who's like, I'm going to make the commitment to do board certification, and I don't like, what's my next best step? What might be some advice?
Yeah, I think I would tell younger self, future candidates, whoever, I would say you need a village. And I was talking with my sister-in-law about this last night. She's in her first year of teaching, and it's like, "How you doing?" She's like, "I'm good at this moment." And I said, "Hey, if you ever need a vent, you ever need a scream, you're welcome to call me. Like I know,
Yeah.
even though you teach elementary and I teach high school, I know what comes with the job. It's a lot." But I say that because I remember talking with a former admin. And I told him, "Hey, there's an elementary school in Salt Lake, and they have this banner, right, draped over the front of the school. We are home to a national board certified teacher." And I said,
Mm,
"I'm when I do mine, I'm going to buy that banner, and you're going to hang it in front of the school.
I love
Make you do that." And by the way, that's significant because in Utah we have less than 200 national board certified teachers. We're like the lowest in the entire United States, so it is a big deal when one of us gets it.
for sure.
And so that's why I say a village, because it said admin looked at me and said, "Well, why would you do that?
Mm,
Why would you go for this?" And I was like, "You're not my village," kind of thing. Like you need somebody that can listen to you when you're having those rough patches. You need somebody who can support you. You need people that are just going to check in every now and then. Hey, do you have questions? And that's why, like, I really appreciate what Tony and Gary are doing with that Utah cohort here. We meet once a month on a Zoom, and we get in, and they have specialists in some of the different areas, and they do come out. Hey, what questions do you have? And
mm.
I think we could just do like a 2 hour Zoom on the questions. Hey, I don't know. That's kind of the village, and it's like
Yeah.
I know I have Tony's number, I have John Arthur's number, like I have people that I can reach out to and ask, what can I do, who can you put me in touch with? And I think that's really, really awesome, and that's something that I hope not just in Utah but across the United States that we start to build up a little bit, is having those villages for the teachers, so that whatever type of support I need I can get, whether it's, hey, I don't understand this component. Hey, can somebody take a look at this before I push submit? Because I'm a little scared,
Yep.
something like that, because teaching is better when we work together.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Scott. One, for that advice. I mean, I think it's going to resonate with many people. And two, if you're listening to this and you hear Scott saying, find your village, engage in your village, and you're like, but I don't see myself having one here, I encourage you to connect outside of your school building, maybe outside of your school system. I would say some of my most close professional relationships, and ones that like I continue to lean on when I'm like, hey, working on this project, do you have thoughts, or need to connect with a teacher in this state, can you support, are people who I've never even taught with in my life, right? But we've connected either through work that we've done together or friends of a friend. And so your village is out there. They just may not be, in your hall, and that's okay. They're there, and they'll find you and you'll find them. So, Scott, I am so grateful that you took part of your morning with us. I know we're so grateful, and I'm so excited to continue to see what you do in the work in Utah and across the nation. And I can't wait until you have MDCT behind your name.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate the time and opportunity to speak with you. This was a blast. This was fun.
Isn't it great? It's just like a conversation amongst friends on a
Yeah.
Wednesday morning.
Yeah. Well, thank you for everything. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much, Scott. We'll be in touch.